Hello, Dr. Elizabeth A. Carter here of Appeal. Welcome to my masterclass. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hope that you are having a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining me for today's session. Go. Today's session is about getting past your performance review conversation. If you were part of my October masterclass, I talked to you about how to complete your self-assessment. And normally in companies, you do your self-assessment first, and then the manager provides their comments, and the two of you come together for a meeting. And today I'd like to talk to you how to be able to get through that conversation with ease. And I know I've been on both sides, both the giver and the receiver side, and there are various methods that managers use during this time of year. And some of it may agree with you and some of it may not. So today's objectives are to talk about those different types of managers and their style. And I will share with you a process for you to get past that conversation, regardless of what type of manager they are. For those of you who know me, I love acronyms. So P.A.S.T will stand for 4 particular things that you'll need to do. And as always, I always enjoy talking to employees about their assessment, what the conversation was, what they need to be doing different in the new year. So at the end, please take a look at what I have to offer as far as continuing this conversation. First, a little bit about me. And this is Nelson Mandela. And he talks about, in this particular quote that I love, is about climbing hills. And every hill is a journey in our life. And my story is about the fact that I was working, killing myself, doing all the right things. And every year, my review always was that I was doing a great job, but I never saw the fruits of my efforts in the way of a promotion. And as a matter of fact, what ended up happening was that I ended up being laid off. I'm a director of finance, and at that point in time, we were doing some consolidations. And while I was expecting to be retained in the new environment, instead I was laid off. And that really let me think about all those conversations and really, were they good? Was I getting the right information? Was I asking the right questions in my review? Because I couldn't understand how the end result for me was being laid off. And I'm sure a few of you may have had that happen to you, where the conversation every year is rosy, and then you can't understand why things are not happening positively in your favor. So to get started, just a quick question, and in your mind, just think about, it's December, whether or not you have your conversations in December or January, it's coming up in the next 60 days. Are you looking forward to that conversation? Are you excited? Are you worried? Or are you pretty much neutral because, it's pretty much been there, done that, have a medal, just want to move on to the new year? In a perfect world, imagine if you could have the conversation go exactly the way you wanted. And there's a way to be able to do that a bit, or at least better than not having any control at all as to how the conversation will flow. And we'll talk about that now. First of all, again, back to the self-assessment and the real reason why you should do it. And it really does lean into making the conversation with your manager better. A lot of times we are very cryptic in our comments. We don't want to do it. We don't really reflect back to the value that we've added during the year based on our work product. And that does not help make the conversation any easier. I encourage you all, if you have not yet finished your self-assessment, and maybe you still have time. I know our cutoff was yesterday and I had to get mine done. But always think about the real reason why you want to do your self-assessment. And I'll talk to you why, as we talk about the manager style, why doing this on your end is the best way to be ready. I have here 6 different types of managers, and we are going to talk through each one of them and their pros and cons. First is Awesome Amy, and that's the manager where when you get your review, her side of the paper is filled with comments, information, thoughts, things that you may have thought she didn't even know you were working on that you did. She has it all there for you. The great thing about that is when you're reading it, you're really feeling like you're valued, you feel important, and you start to think about how much you want to do more for her because you're engaged, she appreciates you, and you definitely want to understand how you can be better beyond where you are right now. Some cons about that is if you're that type of employee where that's just too much. I won't read it all. I'm not going to find any value for it. It's not helpful. Similarly, if what she has all written out is not great because you weren't the best employee, then it will be a very painful and long meeting and you'll feel like it's never ending. The second manager type is bullet point Bill. That's the manager who will send you a Word document, not even inside the mechanism where all of the evaluations are supposed to go. Send you a Word doc, and it'll just be the objective and a couple of bullets, next objective, couple of bullets, and very cryptic comments. Now, if that's your style, you don't really want to have a conversation, your comments may have been brief on your side, and his matches yours pretty much as far as condensedness, then that's great for you. It also makes the meeting a lot shorter. You're just talking briefly about what he's written. Maybe you have a few points to clarify and you're on your way. But if you really want more detail and more context, these bullet points are not helpful. And even because they're so cryptic, you can become confused by what he's saying. You may not be quite sure if he's saying you did a good job or a bad job, and it's not fun for those employees who really would want more detail. Next is Copycat Chris. That is the person who, after you've completed your assessment, you send it over. What she does is takes everything you said and copies it over into her column, maybe changes a few words, maybe where you said I, she said your name, and that's pretty much it. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I have it as a pro, is that, you know what, if she must have liked everything that you said and did, because otherwise she wouldn't have copied it over that way. Or sometimes she may read something in yours and it's like, about that, and she'll throw it over. So that's why doing your self-assessment is very important, because if you have done a great job at outlining all the things you've done, I will tell you as a manager, I have forgotten all the things that my staff has done. So you reminding the manager is always good. Cons about Copycat Chris is that, you know, did she really take the time to think about what she wanted to say? Does she really have any value added comments about how you're doing, what she thinks you could be doing differently, what she thinks you're doing well at? The other probable reason could be that if you've moved to a new department, the manager may not know you. So at that point in time, it pretty much is whatever you said is probably great because I don't know otherwise. So that could be another reason why Copycat Chris exists. But hopefully, if you've moved from another area to here, your prior manager is gracious enough to still provide you comments. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen, depending on how long ago you did move. The next manager type is Debatable Danny. He is the one that everything you said, he had something to say against it. It was like point, counterpoint. Every single thing you said, he had something to say that contradicted what you said around what you did, the work product you put forth, the metrics that you displayed. Nothing you said was accurate. The pro about that is that now you pretty much know what he thinks. He thinks about you, about your work, about what you're doing. And that's helpful because a lot of times managers don't always tell you everything that they think or perceive of you. The second good point about debatable Dan is that if you don't take it to be, in a sensitive way, it could be a really great conversation to really become aligned, because if what he's saying does not match what you're saying, then you're misaligned, and you want to be able to understand where he's coming from, because that, if you don't get that straight, that really will put a strain on the relationship, which is some of the cons of working with debatable Danny. Depending on who you are, you may take everything to heart and your temper will rise. And now the conversation is not fun, and it really could strain the relationship. And if you're in that department for a while, now coming to work every day will not be fun and you will become disengaged. And that probably was not the intent of Danny with his feedback. So we really want to be careful of that. Next is Read It Rachel. This is the manager that will, again, write all their comments down in a Word doc and then send it to you via email and say, hey, take a look at this. If you have any questions, let me know. The pros of that is the fact that, hey, you know what? That saves you some time. And if you didn't really like the process anyway, you could just read it and say, not bad, and say, all right, I'm good. The cons are that it really is very informal, and I really think it's kind of rude. If you've been working for this person for this entire year, they should really at least want to have a face-to-face conversation with you. And why wouldn't they? Now, unless they are out on vacation or if they're in a different location. So now we're work from anywhere. And maybe if you're on the West Coast and they're on the East Coast, okay, it's not probable to have a face-to-face, but at least get on a Zoom or some type of mechanism where you can see each other. And at least that would be better than just sending it off and say, okay, let me know via email. Last is No Convo Nikki. That's the manager who doesn't do anything as part of the process. They don't give you any feedback. They don't comply to the process. You have no information about what you did well or not well during the year. Now, again, if you don't like the process, it's great. This way, now you know that you don't have to worry about it, and you move on to next year. And if you're leaving or changing departments, it really doesn't matter what the manager thinks because you're gone. Now, on the other end, you could be missing out on critical information. You do want to know how you're doing. You want to understand your recognition, what you're doing well. And I have found, and I always encourage employees to fill this out but they don't believe me. But some companies do look for prior reviews to use when they're considering an internal movement. I'll always make sure I complete my self-assessment, and I hope my manager does some sense of any of the other behaviors, not No Convo Nikki, but just in case someone says, hey, I would love to see your review. And even what I do is I keep all my reviews, my comments, and the manager, because that can go in your resume. That's all great information to use as stories when you're having conversations with your interviews, or even to layer into your resume if something is very meaty enough from the commentary that you feel is worth adding. Now, thinking about all these manager types, Awesome Amy, Bullet Point Bill, Copycat Chris, Debatable Danny, Read It Rachel, and No Convo Nikki, which manager do you have? I tell you, I personally am an awesome Amy, but I've had many employees who will send me in their self-assessment bullet points. And even though I try to mirror my style based on their preference, sometimes it's hard. And as an employee, you pretty much know what type of style your manager is, and you can determine how you're going to handle that. So what I want to share with you is the steps to getting past that review conversation. And PAST, like I said, is an acronym. Let's first start with the P. The P says to prepare mentally. Knowing that the style of the manager is probably going to be the same as it was last year, let's not fool ourselves thinking that it will be any different. Because if we're walking in thinking, oh, I hope this is going to be awesome Amy this year, and it's still good old bullet point Bill, you're going to be upset. So understand that the manager style probably will not change. And especially if the manager has many employees, they can't, again, unless they start writing the reviews really early, they wouldn't be able to write paragraphs for every single employee if they have 15, 20, 30 employees. So sometimes you have to resort to the fact that size does make a difference. And as long as you have the right conversation, ultimately, what's on the paper doesn't matter. Second, expect the effort that you put in may or may not be reciprocated. Same thing. Even though you may have written paragraphs and paragraphs about what you did, on the other side, you may not see the same. And another thing that I laugh because employees are always surprised in the conversation, and that's because in their self-assessment, they only write the positive points. And a lot of times, the debatable Danny piece is the fact that you haven't articulated some of the areas that did not go well, or some of the objectives that you did not complete. So understanding, and we know what we didn't do. We know what didn't go well. Don't be surprised if it comes out on the other end. Just because you didn't mention it doesn't mean it didn't happen. As long as you're mentally prepared that that will come up and you haven't disclosed it on your end, don't be surprised. Second is ask. Don't let the manager use words like I think or I believe when they're having the conversation with you. What you need is to ask clarifying questions, and you want examples. I believe that you don't really like this job. Okay, well, what gives you that indication? And they would need to be able to rattle off to you the reasons why they think you don't like the job. Well, you come in late every day. You call in sick once a week. I give you assignments, you don't complete them. Examples. But if they can't back up what they say around what they think or believe, you really have to question, then maybe that's just an assumption and they are falsely assuming certain things about you. Third is set future expectations. Depending on the nature of the conversation, there should be some areas that you'll be discussing that are areas of growth and some challenges. And even though they may not articulate all of that in their written word, you still want to first ask and then determine, hey, you know what can I be doing differently next year? Or you identified a couple of areas that you thought were of concern for you. How can we get to a point where we kind of eliminate that thought in your head? Or how can we do things in a different way? And what that also does is creates improved conversations. A lot of times, once a year is the only time we talk to each other about our performance. And I know companies have gotten better at process orienting the fact that you should be having what we call check-ins, but they don't always happen. And I will admit I'm one of those also, because depending on how big or small your team is, we do need to be focusing on our people and also our roles. And those who are doing well There's not much to say. But those who may not be doing well, we're trying to allow them some time to catch up, get back on track. So talking all the time sometimes is not really a good thing to do either. So this time of year, you definitely want to say, okay, based on our discussion, can we formally talk 4 times next year, once a quarter? Or if you think you need to do it more frequently, please do so. But set the expectation at that point in time. This way, the following year, we're not having the same conversation about the same exact areas we discussed today that you are doing well or not well. Go next slide. All right. And the fourth, the T is thanks. Always thank the manager for their time. Or even if they send you, if Rachel sends you just an email, say thank you. Because no matter what they said, feedback is a gift. And it's said that, it's 90% of, it's 10% of what happens to you, 90% of how you react. Reacting in the wrong way to what you're reading or hearing is not a good thing. That's why the clarification, asking questions, setting expectations really helps. But in the end, you're thankful for whatever they have to say because that helps you think about what's next. My other comment here is really about just make sure you're not trying to read through the tea leaves to see, is there a hidden agenda? Are there any clues the manager is giving you pertaining to what may be happening in the future? And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. But saying thanks and being grateful and ending on a positive note, you may be able to get some of those hints out in the open. If you leave it on a bad note and you're disgruntled, then you could run the risk of not hearing everything that you needed to hear and know. And in the future, there could be some surprises for you that may not be in your favor. So that was the tips about how to get past your performance review conversation. I hope it was very helpful. I love talking about the different types of managers. Again, I'm thinking you've probably had one or more of those, and I hope you enjoyed it. So now, thinking about all of that, how are you feeling now? Are you now excited because you have a plan? Are you relieved? Are you neutral, or do you feel worse because now you're trying to anticipate every single thing the manager's going to say to you? But otherwise, relax. It will be a great conversation. Again, we know where we've done well. We know where we may have had challenges. It's just hearing it from someone else is always difficult, but we know it exists. And if you feel once you get past that conversation that it didn't go, or it's not going to go as well as you liked, what are you going to do? And realistically, assessing the year yourself and then thinking about 2022